All right, so far we've been learning about supply and demand and looking at how when price changes, supply or demand can increase or decrease how much is produced, right? If price goes up, then sellers are going to be willing to produce more. Uh, On the other hand, if price goes up, then buyers are going to want less. Okay. And so we've now moved into talking about this idea of equilibrium, right? That when supply and demand meet, then the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are the same, and the market has reached equilibrium. So this picture here, one of the examples we've used from the textbook, is about a farmer's market where the farmer sells watermelons, and it takes him some time to figure out the right price of the watermelons. And so once he figures out that equilibrium price, then the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. It's just right. So we're going to do a little bit of review in this set of notes, but we're also going to talk about how other factors can influence supply and demand and therefore influence the price of goods. So a little bit of review, just to keep coming back and reviewing. When we're looking at supply and demand, this graph with the downward sloping curve is the demand curve, and that entire line represents demand. Okay, the whole line is demand, it's just demand at different prices. As price changes, demand itself doesn't change. The line stays the same. What changes is the quantity demanded, right? So if the price is at $2.50, then the demand for tacos on this graph is about 3 per week. If the price changes to $1 per taco, the demand line stays the same. What changes is the quantity that's demanded. The quantity demanded now is 9 tacos per week. On the other side of that is the supply curve. And so that's the one that goes up to the right. This shows a supply curve for tacos. And the entire line represents supply. As price changes, the quantity supplied is the only thing that changes. The line, the curve, stays the same. Okay. So if this person is selling tacos at 50 cents, they're going to be willing to make 250 of them. If that goes up to $1.50, the supply curve stays the same, but the quantity supplied goes up to 350. So that idea of if price is the only thing changing, then quantity demanded changes, not necessarily the entire line. Later on in this set of notes, we're going to talk about how other things might make the entire line move. So once we understood what supply and demand curves looked like, the next thing we talked about was equilibrium. So we're still reviewing a little bit here. And I put this picture of a lot of you have probably played on one of these or something like it. It's a balance ball, right? Where you have one foot on each side and you're trying to balance yourself, because that's sort of what supply and demand are like when it comes to determining prices, right? You're trying to find the right balance. So you don't want to be too far one way or the other. You don't want the price to be too high or too low. You want to find a good balance. And that point is called equilibrium. When supply and demand meet, when those two lines cross each other, the market has reached the equilibrium point. And so you can see from this graph here, when the two lines meet, the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are the same. At that black dot, if where demand meets supply, draw down and you can see that the quantity demanded is 200 watermelons, and that's also the quantity supplied. But what happens when the price is not right? What happens when the price is too high or too low? So in the textbook, the example they used was a smoothie shop that makes smoothies. If the price of a good, in this case smoothies, is too low, there's going to be excess demand, and that's going to create a shortage. So in this case, the price is set at $1.50 for a smoothie. And you can see that on the supply line, the store is only willing to make 1,000 smoothies. But the demand is at 5,000 smoothies, right? People want those smoothies. So that creates a shortage. The seller's not able to make and sell enough to meet the demand. So the seller needs to raise their price in order to get to equilibrium, right? They're going to realize, hey, you know what? There's a lot of demand. If we raise our price, we can make more money. So they will raise the price to $2.50 and they will hit that equilibrium point. What about the flip of that? What if the price is too high? That's going to create excess supply and a surplus. So if the smoothie store sets the price at $3.50, they're going to be willing to make a lot of smoothies because that's a good price. They can make a lot of money. They'd be willing to make 5,000 smoothies at that price. But the demand is not that high. The demand at $3.50 is only for 1,000 smoothies. So you have a surplus of 4,000 smoothies, right? That's not good for sellers either. They don't want to make and waste all of this product. So in this case, they need to lower the price to reach equilibrium. And it takes time, right, for sellers to figure out what the right price is. So that's why I had that example of the balance board, right? Because if you're leaning too far one way or the other, you have to compensate with changing the price. If the price is too high, you need to lower it a little to find equilibrium. If it's too low, you need to raise it a little. And then eventually, the sellers will figure out what the right price is based on supply and demand. Now, here's where we're going to get into some new information. How supply and demand can shift. And so here we're talking about factors other than price, right? Factors other than price that can change supply and demand and what that does to equilibrium. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's keep going with the smoothie analogy because the book continues on with that. Let's say that a new medical research comes out that shows that blueberries are a superfruit and they help you to live a healthier, longer life. And people are like, wow, that's amazing. Okay. So what has happened is there's an outside event that has changed, in this case, demand, right? There's all kinds of things that either can create an increase in demand or supply or a decrease in supply or demand. And so when that happens, the entire curve, the entire line is going to move and create a new equilibrium point. Okay? When that happens, if there's an increase in supply or demand, the entire line moves to the right. And that's what we see here. So if everyone finds out that blueberries can help you live a healthier, longer life, then you can imagine the demand for blueberries is going to increase. All of a sudden, people are lining out the door to buy blueberry smoothies. So the whole line for demand is going to shift to the right, just like we see in this graph. So sort of the pale purple line is now the new demand line. Demand has increased across the board. And so that sets a new equilibrium point. Right? The new equilibrium point has changed the price from $2.50 to $3. And it's changed the quantity supplied from 3,000 smoothies to 4,000 smoothies, right? So the smoothie shop's going to make a lot more money because they're able to sell more and raise the price because demand has gone up. Now, if supply or demand decreases, then the whole curve will shift to the left. It will move backwards. And that has different effects. So in this case, let's say that there is a bad drought and blueberry farmers across the world aren't able to make as many blueberries. Well, you can imagine that that's going to reduce supply. It's going to decrease the supply of blueberry smoothies. So if it decreases, it moves backwards towards the y-axis. So in this case, the blue supply line has shifted left back towards the y-axis, and it has created a new equilibrium point. So the price has gone up, but the quantity supplied has gone down. Right? Now to reach equilibrium, the price needs to be at $3, but you're not going to sell as many. There's all kinds of things that can affect supply and demand other than price. Okay, and when those do, if they increase supply or decrease supply, increase demand, decrease demand, it's going to move the whole line, okay, and create a new equilibrium point. So we're going to practice this some in class and figure out how does that work? How do we determine new equilibrium points? So first off, there's basically 3 steps. Step 1, figure out whether the event that happened is going to change supply or demand, right? Is this something that's going to change the amount supplied? Or is this something that's going to change the amount that is demanded, right? This is going to increase supply or demand, decrease supply or demand. Next, you have to figure out, once you know it's going to affect demand or supply, is it going to increase it or decrease it? Then you will look to see how price and quantity have changed. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. And we're going to build on this with an assignment we'll do in class and for homework. Let's say we're looking at the market for athletic shoes, right? Basketball shoes, running shoes, sneakers, just athletic shoes. And supply and demand has kind of been figured out. They know where the equilibrium point is. They know what the right price is. But then something happens. The price of rubber shoots up. It increases dramatically. So the question is, how will this affect the market for athletic shoes? Okay, so step number 1, decide whether that's going to change supply or demand. Well, if the cost of rubber goes up a lot, that's going to make it more expensive to produce athletic shoes. So they're not going to be able to make as many. That means it's going to affect supply. Right? Is it going to increase supply or is it going to decrease supply? Well, if it costs more money to make shoes now, then we can guess that's going to decrease the supply of athletic shoes. So now we have to figure out how that's going to change the price and the quantity. So if athletic shoes are market and the price of rubber has increased dramatically, supply is going to decrease. That means it moves to the left. The whole line moves to the left, back towards the y-axis. Once it shifts over, find the new equilibrium point, and then look and see, what does that do to price? What does it do to quantity? And we can see from the red lines that the price of the new equilibrium point has gone up, but the quantity has gone down from where it was before. So we would explain this by saying, okay, well, because it costs more to make shoes, the supply decreased. There aren't as many athletic shoes being made. At the new equilibrium point, the price of shoes increased, it went up, and the quantity of shoes decreased. So it's a little bit tricky. It can be a little bit confusing, and it may take some practice to get the hang of this, okay? So we are going to practice this some, but hopefully this kind of at least gives you a general understanding of how things other than price can influence supply and demand and lead to a new equilibrium.